Good morning. As you guys can tell by the shirt and the burrito, we got some Kartboy stuff going on, all right? Some Kartboy. For those who don't know who Kartboy is, he's been in the Subaru world forever. He used to have a Forester, which is cool. And recently, he made some lift kits, particularly for a Crosstrek. So, I have a 2019 Crosstrek personally that you guys have seen other videos of. So Tom sent over a lift kit for us to install and show you guys how to install it as well. You can also look back on his instructions as well, as they are very well put together. We're gonna follow his instructions today, and they're going off the left side. So the left side, we're gonna walk you guys through. The right side, we're just gonna kind of install it and make a nice little cinematical thing at the end of it. Yeah. You start off with brake fluid. If you get halfway through and this is your only vehicle, you are screwed. We're gonna use what the cap says. The cap says .3. I got some Prestone .3, so without further ado, let's get going. We're gonna use jack and jack stands, so we're gonna lift up the front of the vehicle and put the front on jack stands, and then we can start the install. So if you come down right behind the front wheel, you'll see right here, this is called a pinch weld. This is also a factory jacking point, so we're gonna put the jack here, lift it up, and then we can put a jack stand under the car. Next up, we're going to take an impact gun with a 19mm socket and pull the wheels off. Next up, pop the hood. Popped. Hood popped. So now we're going to go after this ABS line, the brake line, and the end link. For the ABS line, just squeeze the clip and pop it out. For the brake line here, we're going to use a 12mm and remove it. Pop that free. Now we're going up to the sway bar link, and we're going to use a 17mm socket and zip that off. Now we're going to be removing these two bolts here. So we're going to mark these bolts, so then that way we can, when we put them back in, we can keep the alignment as close as possible. Once you've removed the bolts, pay close attention as they are different. This one is a centric bolt, so when you turn it, it adjusts your camera. The bottom one is just normal bolt. So remember, the centric one will go on top. Then carefully let the knuckle fall. So up top is where the top hat is. So we're gonna actually be removing this. So there's 3 bolts, there's 3 14s, and then we're gonna drop the strut. I'm gonna show you what that looks like as far as removing the strut, that way you don't just drop it. So we're gonna take a 14mm socket on an impact gun, be ready to go, put that there. With 1 bolt left, we're gonna take our impact gun, and we're gonna remove it while grabbing the strut and carrying it out. Ta-da! So now we're going to take our left hand strut spacer. If you notice, one says left, the other one's going to say right. They are directional. The rear ones are not, but the front ones are, so pay attention. You'll see that it's going to say left on it. If you guys notice on the bottom here, that notch, that is going to indicate the front of the vehicle. So it should look like this. Don't mess it up. Let's install it. Take your left spacer and put it on top of your left hand strut. Now we're going to take the factory nuts and we're going to put them on and use a 14mm wrench to tighten them up. Next, use the open end of a wrench and tighten them up. Don't use the ratcheting end or it will get stuck. Next up, you're gonna take some nuts, particularly these nuts. Put them on top of the cowl right by the windshield so they're easy to access when you put the strut in. Now, just like removal, you're gonna install the strut the same way, feeding it up, making sure that notch is pointing forward. So as long as you see that the Kartboy logo is positioned correctly, now we can put the nuts on and we can tighten it up and then go down below to the bottom. Next up, we're going to position the strut back into the knuckle. So with a little finagling, insert your lower bolt. And then insert the top bolt. Put your washer on. The washer goes on the top one, not the bottom. Start threading the nut on, and then put the nut on the bottom, and then we can move on to the next step. Next, we're going to take our sway bar relocation bracket. Our bolt's going to go in the bottom hole. We're going to put it on the strut, and then the sway bar link itself is gonna go on the top hole. Then go ahead and reconnect your ABS sensor. Bloop. Next up, we're gonna put these back to as close as possible as we can get them from the factory using your mark that you left before. Keep in mind, we're gonna need an alignment after, so this is more so just to get you in the rough ballpark. Now we're done in the front for now. We're gonna leave the brake line hanging because remember, we have stainless steel brake lines to go in for all around. It's not just the rear or just the front. He has brake lines for the entire front and rear of the car. Now we can move on to the other side of the car. We'll bang that out real quick and then we can move to the back and I'll show you guys how to install the back. Keep in mind, the other side is the exact same way as the left side. They're the same thing. However, it's instead of the left top hat, now we're using the right top hat. The front's now done, so now we're gonna move on to the back. However, the back is a little bit more, a little bright there. There we go. The back is a little bit more involved, so we're gonna take a little break, have a little drink of water, a little sippy, stay hydrated, my friends. And then we're gonna jack up the back of the car via the rear diff, put the jacks on the rear pinch welds, and then we can begin. Just want to say thanks again for the sick shirt, Tom. Thank you. He also has new shirts available that glow in the dark, just so you know. So now we're gonna get back to the install. So right and left strut spacers is the same, and then the subframe itself is a whole process. So let's get into it. Now we're gonna be removing the strut from the rear lateral link, as well as the knuckle to the link as well. So using the 17, remove these. Then tap the bolts out and remove them carefully. Now we can go up top and remove the two small nuts. Removing this cover. Using a 14mm socket, we're going to take these two nuts off, carefully not letting the strut fall. We're going to install this the same way as the front though, with two supply 15mm nuts. Then use a 15mm wrench and tighten them up. Now we can install the strut back in the car. Reinstall the two factory nuts. Now we're gonna do the other side strut first, and then we're gonna move on to the rest of the subframe. Now, using a 14mm impact socket, we're gonna remove the sway bar. Now we can reinstall the rear strut using the silver bolt. They are color coded and they do matter where they go, so pay attention. Next couple steps, we're gonna be removing the subframe and spacers and all that fun stuff. So I'm gonna distribute the parts that I know are gonna end up where they go around the car, so that way when I'm bouncing between sides, it's a lot easier. So take your donut spacers, do not eat them, and 2 on each side of the car, as well as 1 sway bar relocation bracket on each side of the car as well. So we're gonna take the right side bracket. There you go. We're gonna take 2 donut spacers. There you go, okay. Now we're gonna take the left side. And you can tell it's the left side because there's an L. So that's gonna go on the left side. And then 2 for you. As well as these reinforcement bracket extensions as well. So, there you go. There you go. Next thing we can distribute is 2 longer bolts for you and 2 new washers. And that's right, you guys guessed it. 2 for you, 2 for you. Now Tom supplied new hardware for the entire kit, so you're not gonna be reusing a lot of the older hardware. So you guys can either just throw it out or just throw it in a bag for a later purpose. Now we're going up to the e-brake cable bracket, as well as this bolt here that holds the under tray on. Now we're using a 12mm socket again. We're gonna remove the brake line from the knuckle. Do that on both sides. Now we're gonna move on to doing the rear subframe. So let's put a jack under the rear diff and just get some support under there, because we are gonna be lowering the entire rear cradle. So support your local diff. On each side there's a bracket and they have 2 14mm bolts. So let's remove these 2 14mm bolts, and then we can go to the other side and do the same thing, and then we can go ahead and loosen these 4 subframe bolts. Before we go to the other side, we can also undo the sway bar bracket, as we have a new drop bracket as well as an upgrade bracket. So go ahead and remove this with a 12mm socket. Now using a 12mm on a ratchet, we can undo the bracket. So we're on the passenger side right now. You have a bolt here, a bolt there. Now going to the driver's side, you have a bolt here, and you have a bolt there. We're gonna go around and break all 4 of them free. It's a 19mm socket, and then we'll go to the next step. So now go around and lower each bolt about 1/2 inch at a time. Now we can go ahead and slowly lower the jack, keeping an eye on everything. Now go ahead and lower the jack and make sure everything comes down. Okay. Now that we have at least an inch gap, we can fit the spacer in there. So let's go ahead and remove the factory bolt here carefully. So making sure that you leave the factory spacer piece in place, take a spacer, place that guy on top. You're gonna put a new washer, hello washer, onto the bolt, and then this will go like this. And then reinstall. Next we can do the front one on the passenger side. Removing the old bolt and washer. Insert a donut washer, donut spacer. Take a new bolt. Hey, take a new washer. Slide that on up. Now start to snug it on up. Now on the driver's side, we can do the same thing of pulling the old bolts out and putting the new bolts with the washers in. Now what you want to do, jack up the subframe so everything is kissing, and then we can go ahead and tighten up the bolts to a factory spec. Next we're going to slide our support bracket spacers into place and send the new bolts in as well. Then take the new bolts and slide them on through right into the factory holes. Then you can go ahead and tighten this subframe bolt back up. Same thing, you're going to take your spacer, install it up in here. Next up, we're gonna sneak this up so it comes out on top. Now being that we flipped the bracket over, we're gonna use the new supplied hardware to relocate that up as well. So going through the back hole here, put your spacer on, put the bracket through like so, and put your nut on. Then go ahead and tighten that up. Like so. And then do the same on the other side. Now we can move on to the sway bar bracket. So first, take your spacer, hold that bad boy there, slide your long bolt through the back, and line that up with the front hole. Then put your back bolt in, and then you're supplied with 2 nut and bolt combos. That's what's gonna bolt your sway bar back onto the bracket. So go ahead and do that now. Now let's go to the other side before we tighten this up. Same thing, we're gonna do the relocation for the parking brake bracket first. Go ahead and tighten that up with a 12. And now we can move on to the sway bar bracket. Now go ahead and tighten up all your hardware with a 13mm socket. Now we can go ahead and reinstall our factory sway bar, reusing the factory nut. And then repeat on the other side. Now we can reconnect the lower control arm to the knuckle. So we're going to use a jack under the control arm here and lift it up. Kartboy actually, when he made this kit, had some DOT approved stainless brake lines already made up for these cars. So another perk of buying this kit, you get some stainless steel brake lines. So let's go ahead and install these. The 2 that are straight are the fronts, and then the one that has the 45-degree bend, these guys go on the rear. As well as it comes with some new banjo bolts. It's basically the same if you guys have installed stainless brake lines on any car before. new banjo bolts, new crush washers, new brake lines, and then some retainer clips. We'll go ahead and install some front and rear brake lines, and then you bleed it like a normal car. So you start from the furthest from the cylinder, which is going to be the passenger rear. Focus, that passenger rear, and then you go to the passenger driver, and then the passenger front, and then the driver's side front. So yeah, super easy. Let's go ahead and install them. Now we're going to remove the factory exhaust hangers. So using a pry bar of some sorts and a little lubricant, you can pry the old ones off to make room for the new longer ones. Now if you guys have seen any of my previous exhaust videos or anything that has to do with exhaust or bushings, I always say WD-40. However, when installing the new Kartboy bushings, use just a little bit of soap and water and they'll slide right on. Do not use WD-40 as it can ruin the new hanger. Now let's throw some wheels on it. Once you torque everything up and you bled your brakes, make sure everything's good, go around, just double check every nut and bolt that it's nice and tight, and then go for a quick little test drive, and then come back and just double check everything, and that's about it.